Bienvenue à l'UGC pour cette masterclass quand même extrêmement attendue d'un show qui a changé notre perception de l'environnement dans lequel nous vivions. C'est quand même le premier qui nous a fait comprendre la réalité des nouvelles technologies. Comme vous vous souvenez, il a été créé en Angleterre sur Channel 4 en 2011. Il est maintenant sur Netflix. Il a gagné un nombre incroyable de prix. Je les ai même notés. Les Primetime Emmys, Producers Guild of America, Rose d'Or, Bafta International Emmy, Peabody Awards. Merci d'accueillir Charlie Brooker et Annabel Jones. Et Pierre Langlais, journaliste à Télérama, qui animera la masterclass.
Bonjour. So it's going to be in English as usual. So those of you who need translation, please you can put on your headsets. Thanks for being with us today. Many questions. We're going to try to go through how this unique story and unique show of yours came to be, as Laurence just said, such a phenomenon. But maybe let's start with the obvious question, since the two of you are here. How did you meet? How did you start to work together?
Have you blanked that out? How we met?
I remember it was painful, but it's a bit like childbirth. You try not to remember the details afterwards. A long time ago?
I remember exactly when I first met you, because we were in a. I was in a room in Bedford Square in London with some comedy writers, and we'd sort of accidentally set up a production company. We didn't really know what we were doing, and we were playing a Counter-Strike video game together, and you came upstairs and were just really cruelly mocking us. That's my first memory of you.
And haven't stopped.
No, I know. And then so then we started working together, and so sort of my background in terms of TV stuff was kind of comedy shows. And we started working together on comedies. I was doing a lot of sort of panel shows, and I did a show in the UK that's a bit like The Daily Show, something like that. It was a bit
6 episodes a year, so not really like The Daily Show.
Like a lazy Daily Show. Yeah, and we worked together on those, and then we evidently shared a sensibility, I guess.
And a mutual disrespect. So, yes, so...
Barely disguised loathing.
Yeah.
That's a joke.
How did each of your background influenced the direction you then took? We're going to talk about Dead Set a bit, and then of course Black Mirror. You also was a critic. You wrote for newspapers about TV, about video games and other subjects, technologies actually. So what was your? I mean, you just told us about how you met, but let's imagine how you came to meet. Where was your background before that?
It sounds like a terrible first date. Where did the two of you meet? We were both working for the same production company, and somehow we met, and I think we sort of enjoyed trying to out-joke each other in a sort of a competitive, you think you can appall me, I can appall you back, you have another go, and then you just, that sort of fun escalation, and then you realise everyone's crying. You go, maybe that wasn't so much fun.
Whereas I was only ever just trying to be nice.
He is such a liar. And then we had a comedy production company together, and there is a lot of black comedy in Black Mirror, and we had Charlie was doing the show for BBC, presenting, and I think we just sort of thought, you know what, we want to do a narrative. We want to do something that we'd enjoy watching, that we'd felt hadn't been dramatized before, and Charlie had this idea of Dead Set that we're going to talk about, and it was just a shared sensibility and an appetite for, you know, doing a scripted show that you hadn't seen before, that you felt that you could do something new with. I think that was the instinct.
Charlie, just to insist on my question, on your side of my question, but what about your newspaper background? Did you, as a critic, did you feel you had a view of television that your experience gave you some kind of insight?
I don't know that it was an insight so much as because I used to write, the columns I wrote for The Guardian were very much humorous columns, and so a lot of the time I was kind of tearing things apart and being unpleasant. And so, but what I probably, apart from anything else, it meant I ended up watching hours and hours of television that I would not normally have watched. So I was exposed to all sorts of things that I wouldn't have bothered looking at, I guess. And inevitably, as part of doing that, you notice, there's all sorts of things you notice that you would critique. A very good example, actually, is that there is a show called I'm a Celebrity, Get Me Out of Here, which is a very popular reality show in Britain.
We had a French version at some point.
Oh, do you? What's it called here?
I think we did. More or less the same thing, right?
Oh,
Je suis une célébrité, sortez-moi d'ici, or something like that. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So if it's the same kind of show, it's basically normally I wouldn't watch that, but I was writing about it for the paper, and that kind of ended up inspiring a lot of the national anthem, which was our first ever episode, because when I watched I'm a Celebrity, there was this like kind of obscene relish for humiliating people, and then it didn't actually seem to only enhance their reputation. So I think quite a few of the things I saw when I was writing for the paper ended up influencing Black Mirror, say, later on. But I wouldn't say that I had any more insight. I hope I always wrote from the perspective of someone who was interested in how TV was made. But it did make me, I was very worried when we did our first drama that because I'd been a critic and now I was actually making something that people would just immediately, you know, that I would come in for loads of criticism myself.
And how did Dead Set came? If you could, maybe some people in the room haven't seen Dead Set because it's not as known as Black Mirror. So if you could pitch, I mean, just tell them what it is and how you came with the idea, because it's quite surprising concept.
Yeah, it sounds terrible as well. It's zombies attack the Big Brother house was basically what it was. So I know you have Big Brother here, don't you?
Loft Story.
Loft Story. Yeah. So it was the idea was that there's a series of Big Brother, which you know as Loft Story, and during it there's a zombie apocalypse happens outside, and the contestants in the show are the last 10 people left in Britain. Basically, that was the concept, and then so that's quite a humorous concept. And then what we did was we played it very, very straight, and it's like quite a hardcore horror show. I don't know. It might be on Netflix over here. I'm not sure.
I don't think it is in France.
Right. Okay. Yeah. Ooh. Well, then just pirate it from somewhere. I don't give a shit as long as you see it. And we had like the actual presenter of Big Brother played herself and as a zombie in the show, and we had some previous contestants actually took part in it. But it's in many ways it's like a prototype Black Mirror. It's the similar tone.
And that's what's surprising is actually it was produced by Ensemble, who is actually that big reality TV firm. And as you said, some real reality. From a French point of view, it was crazy because I don't think the French people from the French reality TV stuffs would, because it was a very harsh critic of reality TV. So was it super cynical from Ensemble, or was it actually the proof that British people have a lot of humor?
Well, it was twofold. So yes, Ensemble, we were part of Ensemble Shine at the time, and but they enjoyed the fact that we were satirising it. And Channel 4, who make the show in Channel 4, who make the show in the UK, we made the show for them as well. So it was a real, you know, folding in of people. And but I don't think, whilst it was satirical, I don't think we were ever snobbish about the contestants. We didn't sort of, there was no laughing at people, because I think sometimes the contestants on reality shows get a little bit of a hard experience, and I think it was more about the viewers and what they were searching for and what they were getting out of the experience. And so we tried to very much avoid any caricatures when it came to the depiction of the Big Brother contestants.
One of your characters, very early in one of the first scenes, says, I quote, "I want to change television from inside." I was wondering if it isn't you speaking and it's your diabolical plan all the way.
I hope not, because that character was a bit of a prick.
So it is you.
Yes, sir, it is me. So, I mean, the idea, really, that it was partly that it came about because they used to sort of have contestants who would go on and say, I'm going to take this show apart and I'm going to sort of, from within, I'm going to critique it, and then they'd end up squabbling over the toilet, like, you know, like everyone else after a week. So it was kind of more that, if anything, the producer character, who's a real piece of work in that, I really enjoyed writing a lot of his dialogue, because he's like crazy by the end of it. He's like ranting and sort of chopping people up and God knows what. But and some of the stuff that was coming out of his mouth was almost a parody of some of the sort of things I'd written in columns. So and rather embarrassingly, actually, I have to say, so the character in that, the producer character, is a real bastard, and then I felt quite bad when we met all the Big Brother production team. They couldn't have been nicer. And I'm like, I've written this thing with this character who's a monster, and they were all just very polite.
Since we're going to move to Black Mirror, you earlier said that Dead Set was kind of a prototype. How?
I think in that tonally, it's similar in that it's got dark comedy in it, but it's also pretty uncompromising. It's pretty bleak. It's quite extreme, and the thing of sort of taking a central premise that could be comic and actually exploring the ramifications of it in a fairly serious way. I think in those terms. Yeah.
And also embracing a genre. So it was very much a zombie horror, which hadn't been done in the UK before, and it was before The Walking Dead, I think, wasn't it? So it was sort of enjoying a genre, but actually giving it some, I was going to say meat, but that sounds wrong for a zombie. But you know, giving it some satire as well.
It's called Dead Set, and then you've done Black Mirror. So tell me if I'm wrong, but when your TV set is dead, it's a Black Mirror, isn't it?
That's a good point. Yes, I hadn't thought about that. Yes, it is. Good. Black Mirror, the title came from I was listening to Arcade Fire, and they did a song called Black Mirror, and I thought, what's that about? And then I thought, oh, they're talking about a TV. They're talking about a flat screen on a wall. It's like a black mirror when it's off. So, yeah, I hadn't thought about that, but it is.
Once we're talking about Black Mirror, let's watch a first clip.
Sure. It would actually be less of a national humiliation than Brexit if that happened. Should give it a go.
Yeah, although he won't decide. Shall I do it? Shall I not do it? Shall I do it softly? Shall I do it hard?
Which end of the pig? It's a while since I've seen that. It looks much more sophisticated with subtitles.
Yes, I noticed it says terrestrial or satellite, but doesn't mention Netflix.
Yeah.
That's how long ago it was.
It was written years ago in the past. It's interesting because that was
very romantic.
It was romantic.
Very romantic.
It was partly, as well as I mentioned, I'm a Celebrity. The show that I was thinking of there, it was also partly inspired by something that had happened where Gordon Brown, who was then Prime Minister, had been campaigning, and he had and a woman had come up to him and said, "What are you going to do about all these people coming into the country?" or something like that. And he gave her some response, and then he went and sat in his limo, and his microphone was still on, and he said, "Who is that terrible woman?" And it became this big scandal, and it was all unfolding live on the news, and he had to go and apologise to her, and it was just crazy. And I was watching this thinking, no one's in charge here. So it was partly that, and it was also partly 24. Did you see 24 over here? Kiefer Sutherland.
Yeah, yeah.
So that also it was kind of a parody of 24, because I thought that would be a hilarious problem for Jack Bauer if there was something like that going on. And so it was, and it also meant I had a template for the writing in a way, so that I knew. So I was writing it very much thinking of, there's an advert break. I need to have a cliffhanger, and it's slightly parodying kind of very Hollywood entertainment.
That was the first episode, and a pretty shocking start. I remember first time watching it, people saying, "You have to watch this show. It's about a guy fucking a pig." I was like, I have to indeed. And so
quite a spoiler they were giving you there.
Yeah.
They should have said it's about a show about a guy who might fuck a pig.
Well, there was a suspense still. Did you want to be shocking?
I don't think, not shocking. I mean, I think again it was, and incidentally, it's probably worth saying that this was not originally going to be the first episode. There was a completely different episode that was written, and then a new boss came in at Channel 4, and she didn't like the episode. We had a director signed up. We were ready to go on a very different, very, very earnest episode. And she, I think now rightly, felt it was too earnest and she didn't quite see the fun in it. And I had a meeting with her where I was trying to persuade her to let us do this earnest episode, and I knew that if she still said no, the whole show would probably never happen. And so as an emergency, I had the national anthem storyline, which I was going to pitch to her if all else failed, and all else did fail. Yes.
But I don't think, in terms of the wanting to shock, I suppose when you're making a film about public's appetite for humiliation and what they want from their celebrities, and how celebrities will do anything to redeem themselves in the public's favour, you've got to find something extreme to express that, and also, not a spoiler, the artist involved in it was deliberately finding something extreme, and that's what the talking point was. Mm-hmm. So I hope the show isn't extreme for the sake of it, needlessly.
And again, I'm a Celebrity. The show, again, what I was thinking of, I'd watched an episode of that where they did a live sort of trial for some people, and one of them was like drinking literally like liquidized kangaroo penis. And he's drinking it and he's retching, and it's like, he's sort of like trying to be sick, and it's live. And the two presenters who are very famous presenters in the UK, Ant and Dec, who are very likable, lovable, bubbly kind of guys. And it was live, and there was just a moment where I caught the sight of Dec's eyes, and he looked infinitely sad, like he'd seen into the void. And I remember thinking, that's fucking extreme. What they're doing here, this is as extreme as it's like Cannibal Holocaust or something. It's like crazy, but it was like mainstream ITV entertainment. So to me, it's not that shocking.
Looking back at it, it's probably one of your most realistic episodes.
Well, it turned out it was very realistic, allegedly. That was a weird evening. Yeah.
Sounds like you were there.
No, I wasn't. If I'd known about that rumour about David Cameron, I wouldn't have written an episode about it. I'd have just been screaming it at traffic.
Yeah. Or blackmailing him.
No, we sometimes like to do, periodically we do episodes which have no sci-fi element whatsoever. So we like Shut Up and Dance in season 3 is another example of that, where it's nice every now and then to do one that could just happen today.
Is that, did you from the beginning thought of, when I said shocking, I also thought about one thing that made Black Mirror for critics success was that the ability to let us blocked, like like exactly like the Prime Minister on this video. Was that something you were aiming for, to create those stories that would leave us, you know, not on a cliffhanger in terms of storytelling, but in terms of how we felt?
I think that there's definitely, I definitely had a sense that if we were, certainly when we were first doing the show, you sort of think, well, we need to, you don't want to just shock people, but you want to leave an impression, and you want people to come away having felt something. And because, I guess, because the stories are, you know, all standalone stories, you need them to have a strong flavour. So definitely, when we're discussing story ideas, we sometimes go, there'll be a point where we go, oh, and then this would happen, and that would happen. Oh, and that's the Black Mirror moment. That's the bit that makes it a Black Mirror episode. And it's often the point at which the most horrible thing is happening, or the most anguish-fueled thing is happening, because you know it's going to have a real effect on the viewer.
But sometimes, you know, the shocking element is dealt with very quickly and very economically. So, for example, in one episode called Be Right Back, where Hayley Atwell is a woman who her husband has just died, and she's trying to cope with her grief and her mourning, you know, the idea of her being able to bring him back in various increasingly sophisticated forms, so first in email, and then his voice, and then, you know, a fleshed version of him, you know, that is dealt with quite quickly, and the rest of the story plays out, you know, very domestically, very simply and very personal, and it's a very small, intimate story. And I suppose hopefully the power comes from her emotion, and how, you know, an exploration of how you cope with grief in the digital world, where his image and his being is omnipresent. So that's not particularly shocking, I think. It's just hopefully, you know, it engages you and makes you question things a little bit more, not in a finger-wagging way, just in a trying to evoke a response and a reaction to the modern world.
This first episode, the main character is the Prime Minister, and there was other episodes, I'm thinking The World the Moment, where it was literally about politics. So do you think that you're doing a political drama? If it's not The West Wing, obviously, but do you feel that that a lot of your stories are political? I mean, in the largest sense. I don't mean in terms of, you know, right or left wing, but about, you know, criticizing the politics of the world, or of Great Britain specifically, maybe. I
guess, I mean, well, I suppose, but then really, you see, I suppose with National Anthem, I don't see it, I don't think of it as a political story at all. And the Prime Minister is the most sympathetic character in it, really.
But you picked the Prime Minister. You could have picked an actor, or.
But that's because he's the most powerful man in the country, and so it was an interesting story in what. And also, he's the person who's suddenly placed in this. For the story to work, he kind of has to be the Prime Minister. I think with the Waldo moment, it was more. That was a reaction to, because I'd done quite a few sort of topical comedy shows in the UK, and sometimes people would say things like, oh, you guys should run for office, I'd vote for you, and I'd think, don't vote for any comedians, they're the worst people to do that. I'd be rubbish. And also at the same time, there was Boris Johnson, who is probably going to be the fucking Prime Minister.
Not fucking Prime Minister.
Probably.
You're obsessed.
I shouldn't swear so much, should I? Sorry.
We're in France, we swear all the time.
Oh, okay, fine, good. He was appearing on comedy shows, and he was appearing as a contestant on things, and he was being written up as though he was a sort of lovable, bumbling comic oaf, instead of a just irresponsible right-wing maniac, and so it was partly about and he was running for mayor. He became mayor of London, and it was partly about that, about a collision of those two ideas. About, well, what if you had like and it stemmed from a conversation I'd had with Chris Morris, who I did this show called Nathan Barley, which was a sitcom in 2005, and our conversation was would like Homer Simpson. If you could vote for Homer Simpson, would people vote for him ironically? And so it sort of stemmed from there. And it became about, you look at the Waldo moment now, and it looks like it's about Trump and populism. And I didn't really know that at the time. I knew it was about something, and I felt I didn't quite get it right, and it maybe should have been a separate sort of mini-series or something on its own. So it looks more prescient and more political than it is, because I don't think of myself as very political on a day-to-day basis, especially at the moment when I'm trying to ignore it all.
Yeah, I think National Anthem, rather than being about politics, it was about the shifting power of our national institutions. It was about the police, it was about government, and it was about how little control they have in the new modern world.
Really. Literally, yeah, all the institutions are shown to be completely rudderless throughout that.
Do you try to react to the changes of the, well, you do obviously with the way we look at technologies, but and the way we function, in the way we meet people and stuff like that. But obviously between the beginning of Black Mirror and today, Trump happened, the Brexit happened. The world has changed, and not only because we have more smartphones. So how do you deal with that?
I mean, in a way, when it comes to like Trump, we sort of think, we look at the Waldo moment, we think we've sort of done that aspect of things, and we don't tend to go, well, what's the Brexit episode? We don't tend to look at the news saying, we've got to do a story about the refugee crisis or something like that. We always sort of just start talking about a story idea or some kind of human dilemma, and then often as a result of that, we realize we're commenting on something else. But having said that, we have been sort of, there's ideas for things that we've had, which are sort of maybe Brexity in flavour, but they're probably not, you might not even realise that if by the time we sort of, not that we've done them yet, but by the time we did them, it's quite a tangential, we don't tend to do things that are too overtly about something. Also, it's difficult because usually we're predicting what the worst that could happen. So if you're in the middle of the worst that could happen, what do you do?
Yeah, so
that's depressing.
So the reality is going to kill your show. Because
no, because there's constantly new things to worry about round the corner, and also there are new developments, and because really what we need to do with the show always is to keep it hopefully surprising. We just have to adapt what it is, and the world is constantly throwing up new ideas.
Where do you find those ideas? Where do you find the ideas for your story? I'm thinking about the technologies you create, so to speak, although they are often, they look familiar. What's your process to find ideas?
Well, we don't have a research team, or we don't have a development team. We don't have any writers. We're quite unprofessional, really, aren't we?
Terrible.
It's just tends to be us in a room arguing. And coming in and trying to, coming up, sometimes sharing observations and extrapolating and exaggerating and and thinking what could be the worst case scenario in a particular instance. But it's got to come, I think often it's got to come from a personal feeling, a personal reaction or an observation, something that you're intrigued by, or something that you haven't even quite realised you're unsettled about, and then chatting it through and trying to find the interesting element. Because a lot of Black Mirror stories are very personal, they're very small, personal, with one protagonist, and you're just following their journey. Often the story is very linear and very simple, and I hope that's why they sort of maybe resonate, because it's not about big conspiracies, it's not about, big epic thrillers. It's very personal, small stories, and I hope as a result of that they just engage people a lot more.
Hopefully, yeah. It's. I mean, sometimes we will. I guess, you know, I'll say, "Oh, have you seen deep fakes? Have you seen that? What would happen if you went on the what's the logical consequence of that?" And then you can stumble into a story idea. And also, quite often, and I think anyone who comes up with ideas will know this. Quite often, what happens is you'll have an idea that's just sort of floating around at the back of your head for quite a long time. And then another idea is also floating around in your head at the same time, and then suddenly the two collide, and you realise, oh, I can do those. Actually, you glue those together, and that works. That's good.
Does it ever come from something you've seen, like you're walking down the street and you see a scene, two people acting one way or another, and you say, "Ow, that's an episode of Black Mirror"?
You know what? I can think of a good example of exactly that happening, which was White Bear. And White Bear got rewritten, actually. Like, it was a very different story to start with. It got rewritten at the last minute, just before we shot it. But I was watching... I wasn't walking down the street, but I was watching... It was the footage of Gaddafi when he was killed. And there was a sort of crowd gathered around him and was sort of beating him up and stabbing him and stuff. And then his body was on display somewhere for people to go and look, and people were showing up and they were photographing his corpse. And there was a shot they had on the news, which was sort of from the sort of perspective of the body, of people leaning in with phones, that looked just like a shot from Dawn of the Dead or something. And I thought, that is a really, that's a very, very alarming image. And there was actually throughout that story, there was footage of like people walking around and taking shots in front of burned out tanks and stuff like that, like just like selfies and sort of. And I thought, that's just creepy.
And even in the UK at that time, there were the beginnings, you know, you started hearing stories about people who were witnessing someone being robbed or mugged, and the onlookers, rather than helping, their first instinct was to start recording it. And you start thinking about what's going through their mind, and how if they're recording it, then they're actually doing a social good because they're documenting it. But of course, they're not helping. And that phone allowing them to have that anonymity or that sort of lack of responsibility was a whole new thing at that time, which we were tapping into.
Well, and the other thing, actually, I've just remembered as well, of course, the other thing was when we did Dead Set, so Riz Ahmed, the actor, was in Dead Set, and we were filming a scene where he was running down the road being pursued by a zombie, and some local kids, like, just turned up on their bikes and started like taking photos with their phones. And I was watching this happen. I thought, that's scarier than the zombie scene. And so that was why it was well, let's do something that's like a zombie movie, but instead of zombies, it's people with their phones, and that's where White Bear came from.
You said it comes a lot from personal feelings. Does it mean that you're as dark as your stories, or are you searching for the darkness in you?
That's like a song lyric.
Let's sing the answer.
You first.
No. I think we're not natural. You're more pessimistic than I am, I would say. You're quite fatalistic.
Yeah.
I don't know. I hope that people do see the black comedy within Black Mirror, because otherwise it would be so unrelentingly bleak. You know, and a lot of the time we are, you know, we're all seduced by technology. We're all sort of playing along in this wonderful, magical world. And so I hope that, you know, there's a little bit of fun to be had with how easily we sort of allow ourselves to be seduced and how complicit we are. But at the same time, you know, it's all exciting. So I don't know. It's I wouldn't say we're deeply pessimistic. Well,
I would say I've always enjoyed horror. You know, like horror movies and comedy, and they kind of go hand in hand. I think quite often people who like comedy also like horror, and I don't know what that is. I don't know if it's some psychological need to sort of laugh at the absurd, or sort of, I remember watching this short Spanish film called La Cabina that they showed one afternoon on the TV when I was off school sick, about a guy who gets trapped in a phone box. Have you ever seen that? Watch it. It's on YouTube.
So this guy had, but
somebody over there has. Look it up on YouTube. I won't tell you what happens. Just look it up. They showed that in the afternoon, and it made a big impression on me. And I sort of think that I'm easily unsettled by calm and niceness. I think I can trace it back to the 80s. I grew up I was born in 1971, and in the 1980s I remember having a horrible moment of realizing that nuclear bombs were a real thing, and that I sort of expected to at any moment die in a nuclear explosion. And thinking this, you'd look at the news and you'd see Reagan and missiles, and you'd think, why isn't everyone in the world out in the street going, ah? Why are people buying bicycle clips and worrying about what casserole they're going to have and painting their houses? Why aren't they out in the street just fucking panicking? And so the calmness of things, I found just, how can anyone concentrate on that? And so when I saw iPhone adverts, when they first came along in like 2009 or whatever it was, and they were full of this like calm, gentle, like happy imagery, it looked to me like, have you seen Soylent Green ever? It's a very good dystopian sci-fi film. There's a bit in Soylent Green where this old guy goes to get euthanized and turned into food and eaten, and before they kill him they show him a film of the beautiful world that's been eradicated. He watches this film of like deer dancing through a forest and beautiful lakes and trees, and is so beautiful he cries, and then they kill him. And iPhone adverts reminded me of that.
So hold on, if you see a nuclear war about to happen, you're panicked. If you see an iPhone advert, you're panicked.
No. I think if I saw a nuclear war was about to happen, I'd be perversely relieved that I had a reason to actually be anxious. Whereas if I look at the news and it says nuclear war going to happen, and then you go out in the street and there's people going, oh, look at that lovely duck. Ooh, isn't this what a beautiful windmill? I think, what the fuck? That's the unsettling bit.
Okay. I'm struggling to follow this. And
that's why The Wicker Man is... maybe it only makes sense in my head. That's why The Wicker Man is such a good horror movie, because he goes to this idyllic, wonderful, and it turns out to be awful. Maybe this is just therapy. After so much darkness, we're gonna watch another clip and maybe prove that you are not that dark, and maybe you get sweetness in you. Good. Let's watch the deuxième clip. Actually, watching that is somebody being euthanized at the same time as there's a lot of beautiful imagery going on. So maybe I was thinking of Soylent Green there as well. But even that's got a nicely darkly, I think, a darkly comic undertone to it. It's a very sweet ending.
It's a bittersweet ending.
I think it's just a happy ending.
Well, yes, yeah. So I won't have you undo it. It's, there is in an anthology, when you've got 6 different films, you have to exploit that opportunity that we're given to tell lots of different stories and lots of different tones and genres. Otherwise, it just becomes very samey and very predictable. And that is a beautiful example of taking a great idea, a really interesting concept, and following the character and giving the character what you think they need, and so we could have turned that into a very depressing ending, but actually, in that world, there is an element, as you're saying, of eternal life. Could it be as as beautiful as Belinda Carlisle believes it might be? And we ask the question, but we allow the story and the character to follow their natural journey.
There was also there was an element in that. That was the first episode that I wrote for Netflix, and I had I'd heard some people saying, "Oh, Black Mirror is going to Netflix. It's going to get all American," and I thought, right, fuck you. Okay, open California. So it was deliberate. It was a deliberate attempt to try an optimistic story and to see how that would, if it would work, and it's turned out to be probably the most, or one of the most popular ones we've ever done. But when it moved to Netflix, so as you said, we move on to another
age of Black Mirror. I don't remember thinking, who is going to be all-American? I remember thinking, that's ironic, because Netflix also is a bit of Black Mirror-ish, this very big platform with this famous algorithm and everything. So I guess you were aware of the potentiality of the dark humor that you could use out of that, one or another.
Well, yeah, I guess. I mean, it made perfect sense to us as a home for Black Mirror. It made perfect sense to us on all sorts of levels. Not least, it meant we could carry on doing the show because it wasn't going to continue. It didn't seem it was going to continue in the UK. And it being an anthology show means that it's difficult to. Traditionally they struggle on broadcast television. So when our shows were going out on Channel 4, week by week the audience would drop because there's no characters that are there week on week. And so it made sense to be able to do this show that you can watch in any order, to have it on a streaming platform that you just go and it's there. So it made perfect sense in that way. And I did quite like the fact that it meant that our opening sequence with the thing going round, probably some people might have thought there was a buffer error when they first pressed play on it.
Yeah. And, you know, on Netflix, you know, the films could be any length. So suddenly we had a lot more creative freedom and a lot more creative choice. You know, you can do things like Metalhead, which is, you know, 40 minutes, if that, black and white, which you wouldn't have been able to do on you know, your traditional broadcaster. So it gave us a lot of freedom.
Since you started to tell us what it changed, what else did it change? I mean, seasons were longer, so I guess you had to maybe. Did you have to evolve in the way you thought about your show?
Yeah, I would say. I mean, what that meant, because we were doing that, I don't think I'd have written San Junipero if we weren't doing 6 episodes with that season, because. Oddly, if it had been 3 and I'd done something that was that upbeat, I would probably have been worried that it would overweight it would be like releasing an album where 1/3 of the songs were happy when you're Metallica and people were like, what the fuck is this? But because we knew that we were doing 6, it forced us to experiment a bit more, I would say. So there was that. There's other changes which there's some things I think it's important to be aware of as well when you're writing on a platform where it could be any length. You slightly lose the discipline, or you have to self-impose the discipline so when we were writing for Channel 4, every 10, 12 minutes there was an ad break, which meant as a writer you knew that people might get up and leave, so you had to make sure that there was something that kept them watching. And also in the edit, it had to be sort of 43 minutes long. So you had to prune it down, and that would usually improve it. And you don't necessarily have those restrictions in place when you're on a streaming platform. So you have to be careful that you don't just keep writing and write a 17-hour, unless it's interactive.
We'll talk about that later. As we've seen the credits, I'm going to use that just to go back and ask you how you work, not only how you find ideas. But let's start with the first name that shows up after the director is yours as writer. It's not an obvious thing on television to be the only writer. Some episodes you are not the only one, but most of them is just you. So why? Is it because you need to be just alone, or you don't trust people? Why?
I think we have tried to find other writers just to help me out, really. But I think particularly in the early seasons where we were still trying to find what Black Mirror was, it was very hard to find people who had the same sensibility, and a lot of ideas we were getting were were, this is probably to generalize, but were either very, very big conspiracy theories and about, you know, cruel and corrupt individuals, which wasn't Black Mirror, or they would be incredibly serious and very earnest, and that was the driving narrative rather than it being a compelling story. So we really struggled to find people who understood the season, and maybe because we hadn't done enough episodes for, you know, people to know what we were looking for. And then in the later seasons, I think, you know, because all of these episodes that we very pretentiously call films are set up and are totally autonomous and totally separate and are run as separate films, so there's no continuity between any of the episodes. But we're making films, but on a TV schedule. So, you know, it's very intense and it's very limited time. And so it just became quicker and easier for us to sort of sit and break the story together and find the idea, because we just didn't have time to go out and have, you know, 6 months of development.
So you sit together, you break the stories, and then what? You go on your own, Charlie?
I sit in a room. Usually I have a running joke that whenever we're filming somewhere nice, I don't go, and I'm sitting indoors late. I tend to sort of write, often I go a bit nocturnal. I'm a bit better at that now. I'd write in the middle of the night, and then but then the writing process never ends. I mean, this is why I'm very fortunate that because we're producing the show, it means that, you know, because you have to mentally trick yourself into thinking you're only ever going to write the script once, but you end up writing it about 20 times. And actually, I think the most important draft, in a way, is in the edit, basically. So once you're in the edit, that's another draft in itself. So it's very collaborative, but the start of it is, the start is really lonely.
You said there's no continuity, of course, in the stories. But is there in the artistic choices, there are several directors who worked, so a couple of them came twice, but most of them, they're all new every time. So how do you make sure, or do you make sure there is some kind of continuity, or is it just like, hey, this is your episode, you do whatever you want with it?
You always try and find the right director for the piece. So often we'll have a few names, a few ideas, and then we'll meet with people. And if they respond to the script in the same, because a lot of these ideas are open to lots of interpretation. You know, a lot of these ideas you could play as a overt comedy, and a lot of them you could play very, very, very dark, or very, very straight. So you have to sort of speak with directors to find their interpretation. But yes, we have worked with, so Owen Harris, who did San Junipero, did Be Right Back with us, and maybe won't say that. Anyway, so we've worked with other directors. We've worked with directors who maybe. There doesn't have to be a different director for each piece, but if we think that they've understood the tone of it and the sensibility, then, you know, why wouldn't we work together?
Did you go and like call or send messages to directors you like, and you said, hey, would you want to do a Black Mirror episode?
Yeah. So once we've got the script and we know what the tone is and we're confident of what it is, and that it deserves to be told, the story, then we'll reach out to directors, yeah.
So since the whole world is watching us now, who would be your dream director? Is there someone that you'd be like, would love that person to do an episode?
Let's name someone who's dead, so it's not awkward. Orson Welles. Alfred Hitchcock.
I don't know. We've been very lucky. We've had. I mean, it depends on the idea, though, of course. But we've worked with some wonderful, directors.
So once they're starting to direct, are you the kind of are you showrunners, meaning that you go on set, you work with them, you're always there?
Oh yes, yeah. It's very much the American model, the showrunner rather than the executive producer, which tends to be, slightly more supervising and people who were there at the beginning and then maybe turn up in the edit. It's a showrunner. It's day to day. It's you can't do any other shows when you are showrunning. Yeah.
And one last, I was about to say technical point, but is this the casting? Because of course new characters needs new actors all the time. Same question then for the direct. Some actors came back. I'm thinking Michaela Cole, for example. But what's your process? Do you sometimes think, hey, we need some kind of A-list actor here once in a while, or is it just about how good the actor is?
No. I mean, it's not about A-listers, and often, sometimes the worry with an A-lister is that it's distracting. You know, probably perversely, and unlike a lot of showrunners, we sort of try to avoid A-listers. No,
you had some pretty popular names still. Bryce Dallas Howard, John Hamm, some, you know.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, yeah. We have a wonderful casting director, Gina J, and we work with all of our directors to find, I know this is going to sound like a cliche, but you do want to find the right actor for that part. So it's whoever responds well to the material. And
something I find odd as the writer is obviously when you're writing the script, you picture who the character in some way. Sometimes I'll think of somebody I know, sometimes I'll think of an actor, and you sort of mentally cast them in your head. It helps you sort of write the dialogue and everything. And then when you then look at the audition tapes, if they are tapes, because some people don't read, but if it's an audition tape, sometimes you see somebody and what they're doing is absolutely in line with what you imagined, and it's like, wow, they've come to life. It's like they are that person. Sometimes you see somebody who is doing something very different, but it makes it more interesting. What I find interesting is that by the time we finished making the episodes, I can no longer remember who it was I was picturing when I was first writing it. So retrospectively, they overwrite who the people were. So when we did San Junipero, I didn't know it was going to be Mackenzie and Gugu playing the main parts. But I cannot, for the life of me, remember how I pictured them when I was writing it originally, which is odd.
Let's watch one last clip from the last Black Mirror episode we've seen, or should I say movie, or should I say something else?
Thing.
Which is Bandersnatch.
You just applauded a man jumping off a balcony.
they also chose for that.
Yeah. So. Yeah, you chose that.
I don't know who chose.
It was quite a weird one, Bandersnatch. That was one where Netflix came to us and said, "Would you like to do an interactive story?" And they showed us how their system worked, and we nodded and smiled politely, and then left the room and went, "No fucking way," because you felt it was a gimmick, and I felt. I'd played lots of CD-ROM games in the 90s, which were generally not very good. And then annoyingly, we had an idea a few weeks later for something that would only work in that way. So we had to ring them back up and go, "Oh no, we've accidentally thought of one."
Oh, yeah.
No, I thought you had more to say about it.
The question?
There was no question. There was just reaction.
I was just rambling. Yeah. I was reminiscing.
Oh, you were rambling. Okay.
Yeah.
Good.
Yeah. So that's how it happened. The proposition came from Netflix, and then you just found a story that fit the.
Yeah. Well, it's deliberately very experimental because I'd never done anything like that before. I'd played a lot of computer games, but this wasn't. So it's not, I mean, in a way it's nothing new because Dragon's Lair from 1983 is like an interactive movie, you could say. But I'd never written anything like this before, and this was live action. It was an adult thing on a streaming platform, and I had to sort of learn Twine, which is this like programming language, in order to just write the story outline, because it started out, we were discussing it, and we started with a flow chart, and then it got much too complicated for that, because it needs to remember what you've done. So I had to sort of learn this coding language, and I remember I'd be ringing you up or emailing you going, "This is a nightmare," And you'd be very encouraging and going, well, keep going. And I thought, well, everyone's going to pay the price for this later. And sure enough, when because when it just at every stage there were lots of logistical challenges, and what we were trying to focus in on was we were trying to just make sure that it felt like a film, basically, first and foremost. It was very important, things that seem like the interface had to feel graceful and familiar. So it's just a little aspect ratio change that tells you when there's a choice coming up. The choices are kind of the same size as subtitles. It's very familiar. It was very important to us that there weren't gaps and big jumps in things.
We didn't want the action to stop at any point, because I think if you stop the action, then as a viewer it gives you an opportunity to disengage, and it stops you going with the characters. So that was a key thing for us, to keep the action going, keep the audio going. You hear the characters, and actually it meant that each choice point then felt more pressurized, because you're feeling under pressure because the characters are still talking to you. But yes, the key thing was about wanting it to feel like a film, so that you cared about the character and you were interested in the story. And obviously this is a paradox, because you're doing an interactive, a branching narrative where there are potentially lots of endings and lots of paths, and the crucial creative decisions are, how do you stop it all feeling arbitrary? How do you stop having multiple paths that very quickly feel meaningless and they don't feel as if they're building to anything? So the key thing for us was to try and have an ending that could coexist with all the other endings, and that added insight into your character, and that could all have all had a truthfulness in terms of our character, in terms of the mental state Stefan was in. So we did impose upon ourselves a lot of creative restrictions in an attempt to keep a cohesive whole. And in terms of you saying, it's nothing new. I mean, yes, there have been other branching narratives out there. I think what was very different about this is that it was in terms of how you access it. So it was the first live-action interactive film on a streaming platform, on a mainstream streaming platform, and people came to it not knowing what it was. People might have, if they'd have thought it was going to be a video game or an interactive film, just not bothered and thought, this is not for me. Whereas if you're on Netflix, you're coming to it and it's Black Mirror, you're not knowing what it is. And so suddenly you find yourself being pulled in, and despite yourself, you find yourself getting involved in the story and becoming more complicit. And those are all really interesting themes that we try to build in to the story.
What do you think it says about the current state of TV series, that there was a demand, at least from Netflix, to create an interactive story? What do you think it says about the relationship between viewers and creators, producers, writers like you are?
Well, I don't think Netflix are saying, here's this new thing and it is going to be the only thing. They are very unique in that they have the technical abilities to support this sort of storytelling. And so they said, we can do this. Do you think there's anything interesting in it? And we said, well, we think we found something that will really work and that will be enriched by that technology. And so we were all experimenting together. And, today, I hope this doesn't sound arrogant, but we've been nominated today for a Bafta for Best Single Drama for Bandersnatch, which I think hopefully... thank you. I think hopefully shows that people did appreciate it and engage with it as a film.
But do you think it's an exception, or do you think it's... Because one question that at least journalists asked themselves when it came, it was like, is that the future of television, so to speak? Do you think it's a one-shot thing, or do you think we're going to see more and more of this kind of storytelling?
I think you'll see more of it, but it's never going to replace... I mean, it's just a very different experience from sitting down and watching, being told a story is very different from sort of participating in a story, in the same way that, if I'll play Red Dead Redemption 2 and then I'll watch Russian Doll, and they're two very different things. And so one doesn't supplant the other. Also, it's a very tricky... There's not many stories, I think, that lend themselves to interactivity, because if you if the character, if you're telling the character what to do and they just do it, then they become an inconsistent character if you're not careful. Like Mario, you know, he's great as a character, but I don't know him. He just runs left and right and jumps over things because he's just a puppet, basically. Whereas, you know, so that was why we made the character of Stefan in Bandersnatch rebels against what you're telling him and is separate from your instructions, because that keeps him an individual character. And you can't do that with that many things.
Did you learn anything from the Bandersnatch experience that is going to help you for the more classic Black Mirror stories?
Yeah, I mean, probably. Also, I mean, there were lots of things that I learned in terms of if we do another interactive one, there was lots of things that you do differently, because I thought if we're doing this, we should really try as many different things as, there's lots of little technical things we're trying out in that episode as well. I'm trying to think if there was a specific thing. It was probably mainly, I thought, after going back to write a standard script afterwards, I thought, oh, this is easy. Comparatively. It's not. It turned out it wasn't actually easy, because in a way you're stuck on one path rather than being able to sort of experiment with others. But it felt easy for the first week,
I have
which is psychologically important.
I have one last question before we open to the floor. In 2 days here in Série Mania, we're going to see the new Twilight Zone. Did you feel when you started Black Mirror that you guys doing this format that was kind of old school, that it will come back that strong and that we will see the Twilight Zone again, which I think you're partly responsible for their comeback?
That would be very flattering if we are. I mean, I don't think we just knew when we were first pitching the show, we felt like this is interesting because it isn't being done at the moment. And we probably cited the Twilight Zone in our first pitch documents. We said this is like Twilight Zone. Hammer House of Horror was another one that I think we mentioned. I'm quite excited and also really professionally nervous to see the Twilight Zone. I'll just get professional jealousy, but I hope it's good. We wouldn't. There's no way we could have imagined it would come back. I mean, it's come back a couple of times before, but it feels like they've got a real chance.
It's a long time ago.
Yeah. No, the 80s. There was another one in 2002. Presented by Forrest Whitaker. I only know this because I was a TV critic that I had to watch it, and it wasn't good. But the new one looks like it's got a very good. It looks bloody good, doesn't it? That's annoying.
Thank you very much. Thank you for coming here. Thank you.
Merci.
Merci.